Happy President's Day. I'm happy to bring you Senator Tom Cotton to open the show. Senator Cotton is a longtime friend of the show. He's also the author of this brand new book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. It should be a bestseller. You can buy it today on Amazon. You can get it in a bookstore anywhere. 7 Things You Can't Say About China is an alarm bell in the night. Before I get to it, Senator, when you wrote this, you had to have finished this before Marco Rubio got selected Secretary of State, and therefore you joined the Gang of Eight as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Would you explain to people, first of all, what the Gang of Eight is and why that matters?
Yeah, Hugh, I actually spent most of the time writing this early last year. So in you might say the primary phase of the presidential campaign last year, we put it to bed probably in late summer. So it was well in advance of President Trump's victory or Senator Rubio becoming Secretary Rubio. And I published it because whoever won the election, whoever filled President Trump's cabinet, I wanted to ring the alarm bell for the American people about the grave threat China poses to us, not in the distant future, not in some grand strategic way, but right now, today, to you and to your family. This is something I've seen for 10 years in the Senate on the Armed Services Committee and on the Intelligence Committee. As you say, I'm now the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I'm a member, therefore, of the so-called Gang of Eight. That is the chairman and the senior ranking member of the 2 Intelligence Committee. So you get 4 of them. And then you get the Speaker and Minority Leader of the House, the Majority and Minority Leader of the Senate. We have access to the most sensitive intelligence to make sure that Congress is kept in the loop. And I can just tell you, after a couple months of being in the Gang of Eight, all it's done is confirm everything I say in 7 Things You Can't Say About China.
Senator, we'll go through it methodically in the course of the week. The Davidson window is the moniker attached to that period of time during which China is allegedly able to, and we are unprepared to, prevent an invasion of Taiwan. Do you think the Davidson window is upon us, or has it been pushed back a little bit into the out years?
That was Admiral Davidson,
Yes.
And he said that by 2027, he's worried that the PLA will be ready and capable of invading Taiwan and seizing the island, and that our military might not be capable of stopping it. I will say that Taiwan is the hottest flashpoint in the world, even as there's an active war going on in Ukraine and the Middle East. A war over Taiwan would be a war unlike anything the world has ever witnessed, and is extremely dangerous. And a successful China policy for President Trump would be handing off the reins to the next president in January of 2029 without a conflict over Taiwan, with a stronger American military relative to China we have now, and a stronger Taiwan military as well. If we can do that, that would be a success, because the only way to succeed in a conflict over Taiwan is to deter it from happening in the first place.
Now, Senator, at the end of this book, and we'll cover it in our sequence, you say China could win, and we'll cover their military buildup. I'd be surprised if they didn't win. They're sort of, as we were to World War II, they are to the new Cold War. They're overwhelming us with numbers.
Yeah, and I say China could win in the last chapter. The 7th thing you can't say about China, because not many people want to face up to that fact. And as you say, Hugh, there's other parts of the book that talks about the massive military buildup, 1,200% increase in spending over the last 25 years. China's military is now by far the largest in the world and the second most technologically capable. And a lot of it is geared specifically towards an invasion and an annexation of Taiwan. Now, some people might say, it's like, well, why is that such a big deal? It's a small island. It's right next to China. It does have some disputed historical ties. Yeah, what China has done in Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong is really bad, but that didn't cause catastrophic consequences. Why is Taiwan different? The answer is Taiwan just is different. For instance, Taiwan is the world's leading producer of semiconductors, which power a modern electronic digital economy. Everything from weapons to smartphones to appliances to televisions to vehicles, anything electronic and digital, really. They produce almost 60% of the world's basic semiconductor chips. They produce over 90% of its advanced chips. China is also what MacArthur called the unsinkable aircraft carrier and submarine tender. He said that at the beginning of the Korean War because he's worried that Mao and China, Communist China would take it over. He said it would be a disaster of the utmost importance for Taiwan to fall into the hands of a hostile power, Communist China then, Communist China now. So Taiwan is different because of its centrality to the global economy and its strategic position. And that's why America has always stood up. And even after we switched our recognition from Taiwan to China in 1979, for the status quo, for peaceful relations across the state, and for no forced unification of Taiwan and China.
Now, Senator, you also write at length about what would happen if Taiwan were to be invaded, and you say it's a worldwide depression, but you skip over because it's strategic ambiguity at its best. Do you think we'll get involved? Do you think our Virginia-class submarines will sink their three carriers and their ro-ros and everything else?
Well, Hugh, again, let me stress the only way to succeed in a conflict over Taiwan is to prevent it from happening. Again, I've seen lots of war games between the United States and China fighting over Taiwan. None of them have happy outcomes. Even when the United States and Taiwan and our allies can say fight to a standstill, prevent Communist China from getting a foothold on the island, prevent them from blockading the island, the devastation is still massive. It is probably an instant worldwide depression. And it's a depression that would have a very long echo effect as well because of all that semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan. You know, that's not like, say, oil and gas, whereas if you had a war in one country that produced a lot, sure, you'd have a spike, but other countries could backfill it because it's a basic commodity. Those are very exquisitely manufactured products that are very hard to replicate anywhere else. We've tried to do so here in America over the last few years, and we haven't had great success. So any kind of conflict whatsoever would be devastating to Americans' well-being, to our safety, to our prosperity. That's why we have to be strong in the defense of Taiwan against China, continue to arm Taiwan, encourage Taiwan to spend more on its defense and more on the right things, and make sure that our military is ready to prevent a war.
It's now, much the two things I want to make sure I get into the very first. People have to listen all week long to get everything about 7 things, or a primer. You need to actually go get the book and buy it for your friends, and every teacher's got to get it. But that if that Taiwan invasion comes, deterred or not, if it happens, markets will crash. I mean, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of the equity of people listening to this show, though they have nothing in a Taiwan stat, it will be a Great Depression unlike the Great Depression. Am I overstating it, Senator?
No, I don't think you are, and that's not just your opinion or my opinion. I cite some of the leading experts on China or market players who have said it's an instant depression. Again, partly because of the destruction of all that semiconductor manufacturing capacity on which the modern global economy depends. Also, unfortunately, China and the United States are deeply intertwined economically, and we're very dependent on China for many goods. We need to reduce that dependency, but if a war were to happen and it come to abrupt halt, again, you'd see an immediate depression. You'd see stock market values wiped out, the life savings of families wiped out as well. That's, once again, why the only way to prevail in a conflict over Taiwan is to deter China from going for the jugular in the first place.
So, Senator, do we have things they don't know about that might deter them? In other words, I'm going back 6 years now or 7 when Secretary Pompeo was Director Pompeo at the agency, and I did an interview with him. He said, I can't tell you what we've got, but we got some stuff. Do we have some stuff that they have to worry about?
Well, of course, I can't tell you if we have any secret stuff that might make China a little bit more worried than just what they can see, for instance, at our bases in Japan or in Guam, what we have on an expeditionary basis in places like the Philippines. Obviously, our military has lots of very sensitive special access programs that we don't share with our adversaries. I will say I'm still very worried about any kind of conflict over Taiwan because it would result, again, in an immediate depression. And even if we could fight China off to a standstill, that would still happen.
Now, you're beginning a book tour. Do you expect any of your interlocutors from legacy media to press hard on this? Because as one of the things we'll talk about, legacy media is owned by China or influenced by China to a great extent.
Yeah, I write later in 7 Things You Can't Say About China how China has infiltrated our society. Take Hollywood, for instance. It's pretty widely known that we haven't had a Chinese villain in a movie for many decades, at least since 1997 when Brad Pitt made 7 Years in Tibet. And he and this movie studio are essentially banned in China. But did you know that every major news network in America, except for Fox, is owned by and affiliated with a Chinese or a Hollywood movie studio, all of whom depend on access to the very lucrative Chinese movie market. So it's not a surprise that you have networks that don't ask a single question about China in a presidential debate, for instance. And I don't trust them to report fairly and frankly on China. It's not a surprise that Fox News is the one that is toughest on China again, because they're not owned by a movie studio. They're not affiliated with a movie studio.
Well, you'll be back all week, and I'm going to be following your book tour just to see whether or not any of the networks cover this. 7 Things You Can't Say About China by Senator Tom Cotton, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's not going to have a Mandarin edition that's sold in Beijing, but you ought to go out and get it right now. It's available on Amazon. It's in every bookstore in America, and you need to read it. You need to have your kids read it. You need to have their teachers read it. Everybody's got to read 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Thank you, Senator Cotton. 3 reporters, 2 quite respectable, serious people, and 1 not so, have been hounding me about, am I going to the archives? Has the president called me about the archives? Do I want to be the archivist? No, he hasn't. I don't want to, and I'm not going to do it. So stop calling me. I'm joined by Bethany Mandel. Bethany, it's really, Washington is so nuts. Someone decides to put that in a newspaper story, and all of a sudden, I'm going to the archives. I'm not going to the archives.
Well, you should just start planting stories like Donald Trump decided to give you Fort Knox and just see what happens. Just roll with it.
Or, I want to be the ambassador to Ireland, but that's not, I want to be the ambassador to Northern Ireland, but that used to be, they didn't require Senate confirmation, and they've changed that. So now I don't even want to be the ambassador to Northern Ireland anymore. Bethany, what did you make of Saturday and of the news that 4 bodies will be returned on Thursday in Israel?
So it was really very meaningful to see the return of an American citizen, Sigi Dekalchen, 36-year-old father of 3. His youngest daughter was, his wife was pregnant with her when he was abducted. So he actually met his youngest daughter for the first time. It was really, really meaningful to see these 3 returns. One of the men, Yair, his brother Eitan, is still being held, and he actually just released a video begging for his brother's return. So it's so meaningful to see these 3 individuals returned. We will learn the fates of 4 people who were killed in captivity, which was always part of the ceasefire plan. It wasn't, Hamas throwing a curveball. But it's just, this whole thing is just a really sick game that Hamas has been playing for the last 500 days.
500 days today. 500 days. And have you had a chance to listen to Dan Senor's interview with former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant yet?
I haven't, but Seth was telling me about it. He said it was absolutely crazy. Tell me about it.
Well, that he wanted to go to war with Lebanon, with Hezbollah on the 11th, and blow them up with the walkie-talkie. Recency bias and everything is counterfactual. So it's interesting. I'm not sure it's going to be well received in Israel. I don't know. I have no idea if it's going to be well received in Israel. But it strikes me as inopportune to have someone who was in the government saying we ought to have done it a different way when Gantz and Netanyahu and Gadi Eisenkot were all against it, right? It doesn't seem that way to me. Also seems to me that Israel doesn't know what it wants, Bethany. I can't figure it out. Will you tell me what, quote, Israel wants?
Out of this war, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the argument that I've been hearing from in frustration from a lot of hostage families. That one of the families that I worked with, I've been helping hostage families with some media, and he said, we lost the war on October 7th, and that this is we just need to accept that and move on. I can't say I wholly disagree with him. What does victory mean? I mean, Sinwar is dead. Will Hamas ever be totally decapitated? I don't think so. So what is the definition of victory? And I don't think that we've really gotten an answer out of the Israeli government.
Well, the destruction of Hezbollah's immediate threat, the fall of Assad, the hammering of Iran, the silencing of the Houthis.
I mean, in the north, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the strategic equation at terrible cost is better for Israel today than it was on 10/6.
100%. But I'm thinking about Gaza. What does victory look like in Gaza? And there's a lot of concern, again, among hostage families. Those are the people that I talk to the most frequently. And they're scared that Israel is not going to move into a phase 2 of making sure that there's 73 hostages left, half of whom are hopefully alive. I think that there's a lot more alive than the Western, intelligence seem to believe there were. As we have hostages returning over and over, Israel's getting more and more signs of life, which is beautiful. But there's a lot of frustration among the hostage families saying, what is the end game here? Why can't we go to phase 2? Why can't phase B, I guess, whatever it is? Because, that is in the minds of many Israelis how victory is achieved, is the return of these hostages.
Has the North been reoccupied yet, Bethany?
No.
Okay,
No.
so that's not a win.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right.
Have tourists begun to come back to Israel yet?
No, not really. We planned a family vacation at the end of the year, and we got too good of a deal. And I've done some market research, and the deal we got was a little too good, which indicates to me there's still a lot of product out there. There's a lot of hotel rooms. There's a lot of flights that still haven't been booked.
So, what does the United States need to do for Israel that it has not yet done?
I mean, thank God we have this administration. I think that this was such a necessary thing for Israel's success, but also perhaps even very survival. The Trump administration, I think, has done everything it can do. They have expressed that Israel has their wholehearted support, and that comes in terms of messaging. What Trump said about, all hell will break loose, all of those things are wonderful. And also that the supply of weapons is not going to be throttled anymore. That's massive as well. And that's also, weirdly to say it, the humanitarian thing to do, because a lot of the weapons that the Biden administration was limiting were precision missiles and precision bombs. And when you take that precision away, there are more civilian casualties. And so, thank God the Trump administration is reopening the supply lines of weaponry to Israel.
Now, Bethany, just between friends, the war is going to resume in Gaza, is it not?
That's what it seems like. I mean, I have friends that are getting the call ups who are in the reserves, and they're going back.
So how many more weeks does phase 1 cover? 2?
2 more weeks, yeah. Israel's trying to extend it, but 2 more weeks officially, yes.
And are there women hostages left?
Just Shiri Bibas, the mother of 2 little redhead boys. Hamas has claimed she's dead with no proof. So it's just Shiri left.
Okay. And so everybody else is a man. And are they all soldiers or of IDF background?
There's some soldiers, but the majority of them are still civilians.
All right. Bethany Mandel, I appreciate the update, because it's very hard to figure anything out, because no one ever spells it out. I'm sure it's like constantly in Hebrew, but even the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post, no one ever kind of keeps us up to speed with what's going on. Thank you, Bethany. Follow her on X at Bethany Shondark, and go get Moms. I want to make sure I get this right. It is the Moms Wars Substack. All right, Moms Wars over at Substack, where they talk about things not related to Israel. Everybody enjoyed Donald Trump at Daytona. I think cut number 1 on the tarmac at Daytona. Here's the president.
Remember, I've been here for 3 weeks. And when you saw the inflation numbers, I've been here for 3 weeks. I have had nothing to do with inflation. This was caused by Biden. I had 4 years of virtually no inflation. So I'm just taking over. But I'll tell you what, this country has made more progress in the last 3 weeks than it's made in the last 4 years, and we're respected again as a country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cut number 2, more of the president.
We're having reciprocal tariffs. Whatever they charge, we charge. Very simple. If a certain country like India, which is very high tariff, if they charge us X dollars, we charge them X dollars. It's all right. It's a fair thing to do. Even the media said it was fair. And it's going to be very good for the United States.
Even the media. Cut number 3.
Remember this, that under Bush, they took a lot. Under Obama, they took a lot. Under Biden, they're trying to take the whole thing. And under Trump, they took nothing.
He's got granddaughter Carolina with him when he's introduced to the crowd at Daytona. Cut number 4. a big hit at Daytona. Cut number 5.
Well, I'm joined now by the President of the United States. Mr. President, 5 years ago, we were standing in this very spot. What brings you back to the great American race?
Well, I think it's fantastic. It's great for the country. Our country is doing well again, and we have spirit all over the world. There's spirit again. We brought it back, and it's been less than 4 weeks. So you'll see what we do in a little period of time. It's going to only get better, but this is very exciting.
You brought your granddaughter. I know some of your other family members are here. You get to take a ride around in the Beast. What is that like?
I'll let you know in about 2 minutes because they're going to be going quite quickly, I understand.
And you just got to meet some of the drivers. Are you going to get on the radio again and talk to them before the start of this?
And I say they have a lot of courage doing this. I see it, and I've been here, and they have a lot of guts, as they would say.
Mr. President.
Tom Homan, our border czar, went on with Stuart Varney this weekend. Cut number 7, update time.
I mean, look, President Trump's been clear. We're going to put the worst of the worst at Gitmo. And look, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. No one's off the table. If you're in this country illegally, it's not okay. But President Trump has said from day one, we're going to concentrate on public safety threats and national security threats. You know, Varney, I looked at the numbers today. In the last 24 hours, a total of 229 people were encountered by the Border Patrol on the southwest border. 229. I haven't seen that. I've been doing this job since 1984 as a Border Patrol agent. I've never seen the numbers that low. 229 compared to 11,000 a day under Biden. We've doubled the number of criminal aliens arrested. We've doubled the number of illegal aliens arrested in the interior. We've doubled the number of gang members trend to Agua and MS-13. President Trump made a promise to American people, and we're keeping that promise. The numbers are extraordinary. We're not there yet. We got more to do, but I looked at those numbers this morning.
Contrast with Kamala Harris, who was asked up by the Louis Armstrong story cast on Broadway to give some inspirational comments. Cut number 6.
For those rights to be maintained, which means we have to be vigilant, and it's just the nature of it. I mean, look at this beautiful play and everything that we know he had to suppress so much. But he knew, and he took those risks. But we have to be clear-eyed. And it doesn't mean we don't see the beauty in everything, right? These things all coexist. But I believe we fight for something, not against something. Right. And that's our optimism.
All right, we didn't say that Broadway was NYU or Columbia. We never said that. They don't have Dennis Prager to help them out.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by AmFed, Coin, and Bullion. Go to AmericanFederal.com for more info.
You can hear this today at PragerTopia.com.
My subject is don't aim for a 10 in happiness. Aim for a 7.5 on a consistent basis, knowing that a 10 is going to pass, and it's usually followed by a 1. Stability is the greatest gift that you can have, emotional stability. So you don't get too down with the bad stuff, and you don't get too high with the good stuff.
You can hear the entire episode if you're a Pragertopia member. Go to PragerTopia.com. Dr. Michael Oren, former ambassador to the United States from the State of Israel, joins me. Dr. Oren, welcome. Were you surprised by Saturday's events, or is that what you expected? Hello, Dr. Oren. Something's wrong. That's not unusual. Not unusual when we're talking with Israel. Things often go sideways. I will then go to Michael Waltz on Fox News Sunday talking with Shannon Bream, cut number 8.
Shannon, let me tell you what we heard this week. We heard President Trump engage President Putin of Russia, immediately engage President Zelensky. And here's what both leaders had in common. Both of them said in those back-to-back calls that only President Trump could get them to the table, only President Trump could drive peace. And, this notion that our European allies haven't been engaged. President Trump also spoke with Macron this week. We have a visit with Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom coming up. And we had no less than our Vice President, our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Secretary of Treasury, who was in Kyiv personally, and our Special Envoy Kellogg, all in Europe this week, all engaging our allies. Now,
All right,
they
so
may not.
Michael Waltz talking to Shannon Bream about everything except Israel. I now have Dr. Oren. Hello, Dr. Oren.
We're here. Hi. Thank you. Sorry.
You were the only one that Michael Waltz didn't talk about. Did you feel left out of that thing?
Right. How are you? Okay.
What happened this weekend, and were you surprised?
Many things happened this weekend about President Trump's plan, about the release of the hostages, about military action against Hamas, military action against Hezbollah. So many things happened in one weekend. Which one to choose?
I'm talking about just 3 hostages and no resumption of the war.
Okay. That's an interesting question. Let's clarify. What did President Trump say? He said that gave a deadline, 12 o'clock. We understood that'd be 12 o'clock American time, 7 o'clock p.m. Israel time. If Hamas did not release all the hostages, all hell would break loose. But he also left it up to the Israeli government to decide. The Israeli government, after deliberations, decided to go with the 3 hostages and not to renew hostilities against Hamas if Hamas didn't release all the hostages. So Israel availed itself of President Trump's offer of support should we want it. Now, the big question is whether Israel is going to move toward the second phase of the ceasefire, which means that Israeli forces basically pull out of Gaza, Hamas wins, hopefully we get all the hostages back. But we understand that if we choose not to go that route, to renew the fight against Hamas, risking the lives of the 30 hostages we believe who are still alive in the hands of Hamas, that the United States will back us. Is that clear? I know it's very complicated.
Well, I think so. I think we have 2 more weeks of phase 1, and then nothing's clear. That's how I understand it. Do I get it right?
Yeah, and the scuttlebutt here is that Netanyahu does not want to go to phase 2, but we had Steve Witkoff here just yesterday who said that phase 2 is definitely going through. So my recommendation to policymakers here would be to get on the same page as Washington.
Well, do you think that Mr. Witkoff is on the same page with President Trump?
Don't know. That's a very good question. I asked myself the exact same question today.
Okay. Now, bodies will be returned, very sadly, this week. Is that part of phase 1?
That is part of phase 1, but let us not in any way underestimate the impact of these hostages coming back, not in ambulances, not in helicopters, but in boxes. And not just any hostages, but the great fear here is that we're talking about the Bibas brothers, and Ariel and Kfir, the youngest hostages, and their mother. And that will have a profound impact on Israeli society. I don't know how to emphasize this enough, Hugh, but the appalling display every week of these hostages being paraded in front of audiences, being gift packaged. They get a gift package of going away packages and diplomas from their captors. The whole thing is just so lurid, so horrid, that it's actually having a big impact on Israeli society and on Israeli public opinion. And I think, if it weren't for those 30 hostages still in the hands of Hamas, the Israeli army would be charging into Gaza right now.
Do you know, Dr. Oren, years ago I read a book by Amos Oz where he interviewed a guy out in the desert who said the day will come when war will be on all fronts at all time and everyone's going to be involved. Yeah. And it was sort of like the iron in the soul. He was interviewing not a religious zealot, just a hardcore veteran of many wars. Is that what's happening among Israelis generally?
I think what's happening is they're internalizing a eulogy that was given by General Moshe Dayan in April 1956 to a friend of his who was killed along the Gaza border, and a young man named Roy Luckberg, who was killed by terrorists while tending his fields. And that eulogy is very important to read today, because what basically Dayan said, if you think that peace is coming, you're deluding yourself. We will always have a plow in one hand and a gun in the other, because on the other side, they're going to keep coming at us until they kill us. And he said this how many years ago? 1956, almost 70 years ago he said this. And what was true today, it was true then, it was true today. And Israelis are understanding this. This is not about the 67 borders. It is about our very existence. And there's just this growing opinion in this country is difficult to quantify that says that on one hand, we want to get these hostages back. And according to the most recent poll, 60% of Israelis would want to go to phase 2 if that was the possibility. But Hugh, it's down 10% from last week. Last week, it was 70%.
No, I lack the language for this. I don't want to say realism. I don't want to say cynicism. I do think iron resolve is maybe the right phrase. Is that what's happening?
Well, on one hand, the Army was, I mentioned on this program before, the Army's tired. I was with a gentleman today who spent something 250 days in active combat unit duty. We're low on ammunition, though the Trump administration has renewed the shipment of 2,000-pound bombs that had been delayed by the previous administration. That's good. Still, I just think that there's a bedrock, hardwired realization that nothing can change until Hamas is eliminated.
On that note, I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining me on short notice. I appreciate it, Ambassador Oren. Follow him on X at Dr. Michael Oren and at the Free Press now, because the Free Press keeps getting better and better and better. That music is the opening music to Dwayne's World, a podcast that I listen to all the time. And I was listening to the Valentine's edition today as I went up the implacable hill, Generalissimo. And listening to the long iconium to Joy, and you were saying wonderful things about her.
Yes.
Took 7 or 8 minutes to get to me.
I'm not married to you.
Yeah, but I mean,
You're not my Valentine.
I hope not.
I don't swing that way, buddy.
I didn't know that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
I don't know that there was anything at all in there about the Hugh Hewitt show, because I gave up listening after like 20 minutes of Joy.
Okay, as it should be.
I didn't get to the lilacs part. That's for tomorrow. I want to talk to you about myphdweightloss.com.
Okay.
864-644-1900.
That's
864-644-1900. You lost 50 pounds.
I did.
You kept it off.
I did.
What'd you do on Valentine's Day for food?
Well, we were both kind of sick, so we didn't really eat much.
Kind of sick?
Kind of sick.
You sound like a plague ship in there.
Well, that's because she is a 5th grade teacher. And so she is swimming in a sea of
microbes,
of 4-foot microbes.
Yeah, but is she feeling better? That's the only one I'm worried about.
Oh, clearly. She's she's a week further ahead than I am. She's over the sickness of it, but she's
Does
still.
My PhD weight loss give you a when you're sick diet?
Well, they pretty much guide you through it. But I'll tell you one thing: if you really want to know the God's honest truth, when you're sick like this,
you don't eat anything.
You're not really that hungry.
No, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt also had the plague, but I haven't had it yet, and I'm not going to get it.
Okay.
Knock on what? These aren't wood. What are these?
It's kind of like a Formica.
There's some wood. Knock on wood. 864-644-1900. That's
864-644-1900.
Conservatives for Lower Health Care Costs is our other sponsor. And President Trump has had a great first month, but he's got to make some more strides to make America great again. One of those is to keep a lid on drug prices. There are 575 drugs that went up in price in January alone. They are the result of single provider, sometimes manipulated patents. I'm not always sure, but Big Pharma wants to strip American employers of the freedom to choose health benefits and to let what's work for their employees continue to work for their employees. Those proposals could hand Big Pharma a $32 billion, that's with a B, money grab. Conservatives for Lower Health Care Costs warns that Big Pharma is not on our side. I've known that since Obamacare. I told my law students that last week. They opposed RFK Jr. They opposed President Trump. They want a windfall. So stop it. Go to pharmawindfall.com and demand fair health care practices. Congress can put a stop to the bailouts. You can make a difference. Let's all fight back. pharmawindfall.com. Maybe the greatest song ever for a movie. And it came to mind this morning because in the Financial Times is this story. The Midas Touch. 4,000 years of getting it wrong about gold. Now, I read this with great interest. It's about people who who get their gold stolen. It's about dragons and gold. It's about Ebenezer Scrooge. It's about Keynes and the gold standard. It's pretty interesting. I don't care about all that stuff. I care what is gold worth today, because AmericanFederal.com is my sponsor, and they do the market update. Markets have closed on this President's Day. They're not open, or were they open? I don't know. It looks like they were open. Dow was down 0.37, NASDAQ up 0.41, the 10-year at 4.48. They should be closed today. Are they open today? Gold is at 2,911. That's an international market, so that doesn't matter. And this story would suggest that gold is on a lot of people's minds, and it is on a lot of people's mind. If it's on your mind, not on my mind. I buy gold in January, come every year, and I do the same amount. And Nick Grovich is a guy bought it from this January, and I'm so happy to do business with him. And American Federal is my sponsor. My recommendation is you buy gold either the same day every month, the same day every quarter, or the same day every year. That's called dollar averaging investing. So you don't buy emotionally. It's a day on the calendar. And you neither buy nor sell based on your emotional state about what gold is. So it's up at 2,911. If you are selling gold to Nick, you're not going to get 2,911. First of all, we don't know what you're selling to him. Could be a 14 karat, could be 24 karat, pure gold. Could be the stuff that Dwayne tried to sell me once and said, this is really good stuff. And I didn't buy it from him. I was better than that. But if it was Sinister Dell, I would have bought it from him. You've got to send it to Nick. And the good news is that Nick is very honest, Nick is very thorough, and Nick has been doing this for 40 years. And he'll send it back to you if you don't want to sell it to him after he's evaluated it, weighed it, and decided, assayed it. The technical term is, am I right about that, Dwayne? Is the technical term assay? He's not even listening to me anymore, is he? Assay, A-S-S-A-Y. When you assay the gold, you have to decide how much gold is in the gold. And when you're done, they have to figure out what it's worth, and they make you an offer. And they got to make money. But if you want to buy gold, that's easier. You look at what it's selling for and add something to it. How much you have to add to it depends on how much you want to buy. And when your money gets to Nick, they don't do the float. They're not one of these skylarks who are off flighting around and telling you this and that. And they're very straightforward. Call them 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. But that's in the Financial Times. I'm down to 2 subscriptions, the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. Everything else is panicked media ridiculousness, and I'm done with it. I am not, however, done with Doug Burgum, who was on Fox and Friends with Steve Doocy. They ought to just let Doug Burgum get a cot over at Fox News, because he could do every show all day long. Cut number 13.
Today marks 28 days for the president in office, and my goodness, what he's accomplished for this country in that amount of time is remarkable. And the pace that he's going at is unbelievable. I got elected for the first time the same time President Trump did back in November of 2016. Working with him as a governor then, I mean, he was courageous during his first term. But this time he's fearless. He's operating at a next level. He's at a different gear. And whether you take a look at things like last Friday signing this national energy dominance EO, I mean, his ideas are brilliant and they're powerful and they're simple. He wants to sell energy to our friends and allies as opposed to have them buy it from our adversaries. And that's exactly what we heard from the prime ministers of 2 of our allies, India and Japan. They're like, why wasn't Biden selling us energy? President Trump wants to do that. And, of course, that's great for America.
You know, I love smart people being in the cabinet, and you don't get smarter than Doug Burgum. He's a billionaire because he mortgaged the family farm. He went to Stanford Business School. He decided he could do software. He almost went broke. He almost lost everything and managed to rewrite it because it wasn't good for Microsoft. So I think he redid it for Apple. He told me the story at dinner one night before he proceeded to school me on carbon capture, on transmission lines, on solar deficits, on small modular reactors. I mean, I just kept asking questions, and the guy was like, have you ever watched the movie Big, Tom Hanks, the Swami that he asked the question of? He's like a Swami. It was fabulous. Now, contrast Doug Burgum with Margaret Brennan. They do both have last names begin with B, but that's it. Cut number 9, Marco Rubio on with Margaret Brennan yesterday.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has...
Can we stop? Now, Marco Rubio will get to this. And I like Margaret. Margaret was a welcome guest on this show for many years. She used to come on. But I asked tough questions until Margaret stopped coming on. Not gotcha questions, just, hey, you think the Nazis rose to power because they didn't have a First Amendment? The answer is no, and that's really ridiculous. But let's go back and start it over so you're zoned in, because you might have been driving along. What did she say? We're going to play it again for you Steelers fans. It doesn't make any sense. I'm telling you right now, don't be confused. It doesn't make any sense. It may be the dumbest thing ever said by an anchor on a Sunday show, and that's a long, long list. Cut number 9.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree
Senator
with
Rubio
you.
does have to disagree with her because it's nuts. Now, I am going to appoint myself counsel for the defense. What could she possibly have been thinking? Margaret's smart. She might have intended to say a First Amendment does not exist in Germany, and Vice President Vance was criticizing Germany for not having a First Amendment. They actually have restrictions on speech because of the horrific aftermath of the Nazis. That's why it is unfair for the Vice President to criticize Germany for not having a First Amendment because they're afraid of the Nazis. Does that, hey, Dwayne, does that make sense? Is that a decent, can defense rest?
That's as good of a defense as you're going to be able to mount.
Yeah.
But that's not what she was saying.
Well, no, I'm not. Counsel, pay no attention to what my witness said. She was emotionally upset. I'm saying that she was saying that J.D. Vance should have understood that the Germans are traumatized 80 years later. You're not very cooperative.
I can't condone stupidity.
It's not stupidity. Margaret's not dumb. She was on the show a lot. I think she had something else in mind because no one could possibly think the Nazis. Well, let's play it again.
Too much free speech is what caused the Holocaust.
No, let's play it again. Cut number, I want to be exact here. Cut number 9.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized.
He was standing in a country
where free speech.
Well, now stop. Let's just stop right there.
He was
standing in a country.
It's the same
That's
sentence.
a perfectly acceptable observation to make. Let's go to cut number 10.
I want to ask you about what happened in Munich, Germany at the security conference. Vice President Vance gave a speech, and he told U.S. allies that the threat he worries about the most is not Russia. It is not China. He called it the threat from within, and he lectured about what he described as censorship, mainly focusing, though, on including more views from the right. He also met with the leader of a far-right party known as the AfD, which, as you know, is under investigation.
All right, stop. I don't know anything about the AfD except it's like cooties. Remember when you were in 3rd grade? Someone got cooties. You don't want to be. I don't know what they believe. They don't walk around in brown shirts or black shirts. They haven't got the death head. That's all illegal in Germany. It's been 80 years since the defeat of the Nazis. I don't know what the AfD. I know that they play this game in Italy, right? The Italian prime minister is from a allegedly fascist party, and she's just fine. They played this game in Poland. By they, I mean our media that doesn't like a party. I really genuinely have no idea. Merz, who's going to be their new chancellor, who I have a great deal of respect for, and back in the days when he was ambassador to Germany, Grinnell liked Merz. But you really think anybody in American media knows anything about AfD other than what they've been told by the junior clerk down the hall, who did a clipping service from AP, which has been banned? Really? Do you think anybody has any idea about AfD in America? I don't. Don't know. Not my country, not my politics. And I think you just really ought to report on what the vice president said rather than condemning with whom he met. Yesterday, I opened the program with Senator Tom Cotton, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he's staying with me all week to talk about his brand new book, 7 Things You Cannot Say About China, one that I recommend you go out and get right now for yourself, for your family, for anyone who's a teacher in your life. Senator, I want to go to something on my mind. Mao is a clear sociopath. The Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution, you detail that. When I came of age, Nixon was landing in Beijing and they were shaking hands and he said, I only had a little bit of impact around the world. Do you think Americans my age and younger know just what kind of a sociopath Mao was?
No, not at all, Hugh. Mao is the worst mass murderer in history. And I think most Americans, especially most young Americans, would be surprised to know that. Worse than Hitler, worse than Stalin. And what's maybe worst for our purposes is that Mao was never repudiated in China. When Stalin died, Khrushchev and the Politburo repudiated him and said they wanted to move past that legacy. When Mao died, they literally embalmed him and put him in Tiananmen Square and put the giant picture of him up in Tiananmen Square, which is still there to this day. And Xi Jinping, the current dictator of China, is an open Marxist, Leninist, Maoist leader. And I think too many Americans, especially American leaders over the last 40 years, believe that while China was reforming, as they became rich, they'd become more moderate. And that's simply not the case. Under Xi Jinping in the last 12 years or so, they have doubled down on Maoist control of their own people and Maoist aggression against what they perceive to be their enemies, primarily the United States.
Have you ever thought when you were writing this book and as you study Xi and the CCP, why Mao was so maniacal? Because he really is. I get Stalin was maniacal, Lenin was ruthless, but Mao really is maniacal about human life. Did you ever think about why?
I mean, there are big, vast biographies about Mao. I'm not sure anyone's ever pinned it down entirely, but there's no question if you look at the results of his mania, again, it's the worst mass murder in human history. Inflicting untold amounts of suffering on the Chinese people, who we should always remember are the first and the worst victims of Chinese communism. Mao was unbelievably aggressive throughout his life, not just during the long Chinese Civil War, which finally ended with the communist victory in 1949, but immediately after that, they turned their attention outside their own borders, in the Korean War, to India, to Vietnam, threatening Taiwan, supporting communist insurgencies around the Third World. There's no question that Mao was a singularly malevolent man, and a lot of the depredations and crimes of the Chinese Communist Party today still trace themselves back to Mao.
All right, now in Chapter 1, you're running a very brief history of the CCP for people. Deng Xiaoping is the fellow I sort of remember the most, and he's an impish little guy. Was Deng fundamentally different from Mao and Xi, or was he just subtler than Mao and Xi?
No, not fundamentally different at all. He was, as you say, subtler, and he understood that China was in a position of weakness, and he famously said that we need to hide your strength and bide your time. And China did that for a long time, and the elfin Deng helped do so. He presented this friendly facade to Western leaders. He spoke often about reform and opening up, but no one should mistake Deng Xiaoping as a reformer. He explicitly said that they wanted to use capitalist or market tools to enhance socialist control of China, and that's exactly what they've done throughout the years. He explicitly stood up for the legacy of Mao. And then, of course, in 1989, it was his hidden hand behind the crackdown in Tiananmen Square when you had democracy protesters that poured into the square. And probably the most famous and iconic moment from that time was the so-called tank man, the lone Chinese man standing in front of a column of Chinese tanks. Deng was behind the scenes in all of that. So he was not fundamentally different from Mao or Xi at all. He may have been shrewder in the face that he presented to the world on Chinese communism because he wanted the West to underestimate China. Now, he wanted the West to help China get rich.
In 7 Things You Can Say About China, very early on, page 19, Xi may well be more powerful than Mao. Now, obviously, given his arsenal, that has to be true. But are you talking in terms about his control over the arsenal or just his arsenal?
Largely where China is today. China was in many ways in a position of weakness after the long Civil War and World War II. But its military today is the largest in the world. It's second in technological capabilities only to our own. It's closing that gap fast. Its nuclear weapons are proceeding rapidly, but also internally. Xi has tools of control that Mao could only dreamed of, that Orwell probably could have only dreamed of. They've created this techno-totalitarian police state. Half the world's surveillance cameras are inside of China, for instance. Millions of police and paramilitary and military forces are designed to keep control of China's own people. Orwell said that tyranny was a human boot, or a boot stomping in the human face forever. I think in communist China today, we could add that it's a smartphone app monitoring the human face forever.
Now, in this chapter 1, you recount the specifics of the persecution of Christians, of Falun Gong, of Tibetans, of Uyghur Muslims, and of Hong Kong. Let's take them in order. We got about 3 minutes left in this segment. The Christian persecution is extraordinary. I don't want to say too much bad about the Pope because he's under the weather right now, and perhaps significantly so. But he's cooperated with the evisceration of Catholic Church independence from China, and it doesn't stop there. All Christians, actually.
Yeah, many people are surprised before they read 7 things you can't say about China, that China is one of the largest Christian nations in the world. Up to 100 million Christians worship there. More than half of them are in secret, unregistered churches because China wants you to register your church so they can monitor you and surveil you and make sure that you're not teaching the true Christian doctrine. And those unregistered churches face the risk of being destroyed, or the parishioners and the preachers being arrested and even tortured. They're trying to keep children from going to Sunday school or going to church. They make them sign atheism pledges at school to kind of stamp out Christianity for the future. China is not just one of the world's largest Christian nations. It's also where Christians face the most persecution. The Chinese Communist Party is even trying to rewrite the Bible itself, replacing the Word of God with the Word of
That surprised me. Yeah, that really did. I didn't know that. The Tibetans we've long been aware of, and the Dalai Lama has been a guest of mine before. The Uyghur Muslims, I believe we are well aware of, but I don't think people really get yet, Senator Cotton, what has happened in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, I've talked to his son. We have 1 minute left in this segment. It's effectively gone now, isn't it?
Yeah, Hong Kong has effectively been integrated entirely into the Chinese mainland tyranny. When Great Britain turned it over under duress, as its lease was running out on parts of Hong Kong in 1997, Communist China promised for 50 years to give it freedom and autonomy. That promise lasted only a few years before they started trying to crack down on Hong Kong. The brave people of Hong Kong, accustomed to civil liberties under British rule, fought back for a long time, but then under the cover of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, Xi finally sent in the police and sent in the troops and cracked down on all the freedoms that Hong Kong has traditionally enjoyed under British rule. And now it's really just a part of the mainland Chinese communist dystopia.
One of the many tragedies we will be covering. Senator Cotton will be back with me tomorrow with part 3 of our series. Jonathan Karl had great news for Trump America and not so great news for Democrats yesterday on ABC's This Week, cut number 12.
Donald Trump's favorability rating is actually higher than it ever was the first time around. Let me ask you, a recent poll by Marquette looked at several of the things that he has done or says that he is going to do, and 63% favor federal government's recognition of only 2 sexes, 60% favor deporting immigrants who entered the United States illegally, 60% favor expanding oil and gas production, 59% favor declaring an emergency at the southern border. Is there anything you are seeing that Trump is doing that you are in favor of, that you think is the right thing?
Let me say, as it relates to all of those issues, we're just at the beginning.
Hakeem Jeffrey. No. Why don't we find something else to talk about? Bill Malughian on Fox with Dana Perino this morning, cut number 14.
So this San Diego NGO says its shelter has had not a single migrant walk through its door since President Trump took office. They're now closing that shelter down and laying off more than 100 employees, they say, because of Trump's border policies and his ending of their federal funding. Jewish Family Service San Diego has been running a rapid response migrant shelter that offered migrants care packages, food, legal services, travel coordination, medical screenings, and immigration case management. FEMA records show they had been allocated $22 million last year, but the NGO says they've received none of that money. Jewish Family Service San Diego points the finger at President Trump, saying in part, quote, with migrants no longer able to use the CBP-1 application, the shelter has not received new families and individuals released from short-term federal custody.
Maybe nobody's coming. I wonder if they consider that. I wonder if you've considered Relief Factor. I told you in hour number 1 when I took it. Got my 6 in this morning, got my 11 in on Saturday, did not run on Sunday. And I'm not running, I'm trundling. And so that's run, walk, but below 15 minutes a mile. I'm still going uphill. And on Saturday, I decided rather than go to the beach, I would do the repeat of what I'd done the previous Saturday when I did the double, the Implacable Hill followed by Mount Ridiculous. And I got up and down both the Implacable Hill and Mount Ridiculous. And I was just trying to test out what happens when you do that 2 weeks in a row, especially as I had taken 3 days off. It rained for 3 days last week, so I wanted to get it in. Relief Factor works. It just works. If you will call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, they'll send you the starter pack for $19.95. That's Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, omega. For the first 3 weeks, they recommend you take it multiple times a day until you get the levels up in your body. I only take it once a day. And Relief Factor works just fine for me. No minor aches and pains, nothing to complain about. Get my exercise in, stand up all day, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up. It's all the same to me because of Relief Factor. Head over to their website and find that starter pack for $19.95, less than $1 a day for 3 weeks. You will thank me at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Many of you are missing Dennis. I continue to get updates and good news, slow but certain improvement by Dennis. But don't forget about Pragertopia and Dennis.
I was watching Book TV last week, and there was an author on, and he just wrote a book on the simple life. And he believes that you are happier when you lead a simple life. Well, I don't agree. I think it sounds good in theory and in practice. I don't happen to agree.
So we're not getting current events from Dennis, but we have timeless wisdom from Dennis. We got lots of timeless wisdom from Dennis, and it's all at Pragertopia. It's all collected. It's all sliced and diced. It's all available. So if you're having a little Dennis withdrawal, and I think a lot of you are, we hope he comes back soon. And in the meantime, head over to Pragertopia. Marco Rubio, I'm with Margaret Brennan yesterday, cut number 11.
Keith Kellogg, who is the envoy appointed to help with these talks, says these are going to be parallel negotiations, meaning the Ukrainians and Russians aren't talking to each other yet. When you meet with your Russian counterpart, whoever that is, are you going to be sitting there arguing Ukraine's position?
Well, first of all, I think what we have to understand is right now there is no process.
Right.
What we have right now is a call between Putin and President Trump in which both sides expressed an interest in ending this conflict. I mean, imagine there will be follow-up conversations to figure out what a process to talk about that would look like. And then at that point, perhaps we can begin to share more details. So it's a bit premature. I know there's been a lot of reaction to it because there's been no conversation about it, any serious conversation. But I want to go back to the point I made. President Trump ran. He was very clear. He thinks this war needs to end. And if he sees an opportunity to end it, which is what he's looking for, whether there is an opportunity or not, we're going to pursue it. Ultimately, it will reach a point when if it's real negotiations, and we're not there yet, but if that were to happen, Ukraine will have to be involved because they're the one that were invaded.
Vic Mattis is weekend editor at the Washington Free Beacon, co-host of the podcast Getting Hammered, and an expert in French. Good morning, Vic. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Happy President's Day, plural.
Thank you. Would you please pronounce my name in French, since you and Mary Catherine were doing that today?
Yeah, Hewitt. I believe it's Hewitt.
Hewitt?
Yes.
It's not a French name, but I was wondering because you were doing it. Now, I rarely criticize podcasts, Right. I think yours was very, very fun. But you name drop a French author today about whom I have no knowledge or background, but with whom you were very impressed. So can you tell me who that was and why I should care about him or her?
Yes. So he was a French chef who was very famous here in the Washington, D.C. area, but he had restaurants all around the world at some point. It's very near to my heart. He is the late, great Michel Richard. He came over from France to start up, a restaurant. He first came over to New Mexico in Albuquerque. That was where he first arrived after Paris, and then he came to, Washington D.C. and he, pretty much was happy being here. And he had a very famous restaurant called Citronelle. One of the things that is most endearing about Michel Richard is he grew up in a very difficult circumstance. His father left when he was young, and he had a large family. His mother, took up with a new man, and there was no room for him at home, and he wanted to leave, and he went on. He was waiting on the train station. He might have been 13 or 14 years old, and then he realized he didn't know where he was going to go, and he was just at a loss. And then he eventually came back and then apprenticed for a very difficult, abusive chef. And despite those circumstances,
are there any other kind, from what I can tell, given my clips of cook? I'm not a cook, nor am I a connoisseur, so I don't pay much attention, but they all seem to be kind of from the far side of bad.
They would not make it here in this day and age in 2025 with that kind of treatment to subordinates. But in spite of that, I always remembered that he said, despite that sort of physically abusive relationship that he had with his boss when he was an apprentice, he was always kind to him when he became famous. And the old man, was just an old man. He would call him every Christmas, and he was good to him. But his name is Michel Richard. And he has numerous books. If you could find them on Amazon. He was a great artist. He was a friend to Julia Child and others.
Well, I know Julia Child. She has an exhibition in the Smithsonian, so I know all about her, and a movie with Stanley Tucci. Tell me where Citronelle was.
Citronelle was in the old Latham Hotel on M Street in Georgetown, and that was long gone. But he has one restaurant left in his name, and that is Central. And that is in the Pennsylvania Quarter. It's just off Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and he made amazing fried chicken. He came here, he discovered in the 1970s Kentucky Fried Chicken, the original recipe before they tried to make it healthy, fell in love with that, and made his own version.
Before I turn to the Kennedy Center board and what was an obvious attempt by Mary Catherine and Vic to end up on the board of directors of the Kennedy Center board today.
Shameless.
How often do you eat out, Vic?
Hugh, I'm almost willing to answer any question on your show, but that's a deeply personal question. I don't know if I can go there. No, I will say for professional reasons, maybe twice a week, generally lunches. I tend to be home for dinners. Every now and then we go home, once or twice with the family per week we'll have dinner.
Well,
but
we ate out twice this week, so I think that's fine. Have you noticed that the prices have gone up?
Yes, I'll tell you what I've noticed, Hugh, is at a number of places, and this is traveling. I've been around several places now. In the last 2 months, I've been down to Palm Beach, Nashville, and then just over the weekend, Austin, Texas. And what you'll find is in some places, but particularly here in the District of Columbia, you'll get receipts that will tell you that they have already imposed a 20% gratuity fee, as they consider it a service fee. And in addition to that, everything, it's just up to you.
How are they going to avoid taxes on tips if they're getting it in the bill?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, so it puts this sort of undue pressure on customers to, do you still add? Are you insulting them if you don't add? And also, this isn't for like parties of 6 or more people. We're talking about, parties of 2. Here's your 20%. And there's some places where they add special drinks fees. If you get a martini, there's like a pour fee.
I do not want to get Matthew McConaughey mad at me. He's been nice to the program. but I'm not going to Austin. I've never been to Austin. No, I'm not going to Austin because a 20% service fee, especially if they take taxes off tips, is really ridiculous.
That 20% fee was here in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. I want to be clear about that. Austin was great. Mary Catherine and I did a live taping at the University of Texas, courtesy of the Fund for American Studies.
Okay. Now, can you bring your experience to bear on the Kennedy Center Board of Directors? There are 36 positions open. Rick Grinnell is the CEO, acting CEO, and he's discovered they have no money. That was news to me when I listened to Getting Hammered today. No money at all?
Yeah, that tells me they have a very serious problem. I'll tell you one thing, Hugh. It's not managed well. They were trying to put on a musical. It was called, or a play, and it was called Finn, F-I-N-N, and it's about a shark who feels out of place among sharks and feels much more comfortable around the smaller fish. And you can see what kind of a metaphor that is, and they can show this to kids. And they said they don't have the money to put on this.
This is one of those things where you're making up a story to see if I bite, isn't it?
So to speak. No, it is a true story. It didn't come to pass because they said they didn't have the money. But it surprises me because if you go to the Kennedy Center, there's that wall etched into the marble, etched into the wall, all these great, very important people, donors, and then of course you get the little playbill. It shows all.
It's very near and dear to my heart because I proposed to the fetching Mrs. Hewitt on the top of the Kennedy Center long ago and far away in 1981. I am curious. If they don't have any money, how are they putting on any shows?
Yeah, I mean, by the skin of their teeth, I assume. I mean, usually it's, through like the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, any of these particular groups that they owe a lot of money to, the Annenbergs or whoever else, similar to the Lincoln Center, but apparently not. And out with Karine Jean-Pierre and in with all of Trump's people.
Mary Catherine Hammond, Vic Mattis belong on that board. I'm making the pitch for you. You're DC people through and through. Go and listen to Getting Hammered. Like and subscribe. You will be entertained twice, maybe 3 times a week occasionally by Getting Hammered. So go and download it, subscribe to it. But let's get to the meat of the Margaret Brennan-Marco Rubio exchange yesterday.
He lectured about what he described as censorship, mainly focusing, though, on including more views from the right. He also met with the leader of a far-right party known as the AfD, which, as you know, is under investigation and monitoring by German intelligence because of extremism. What did all of this accomplish other than irritating our allies?
Why would our allies or anybody be irritated by free speech and by someone giving their opinion? We are, after all, democracies. The Munich Security Conference is largely a conference of democracies in which one of the things that we cherish and value is the ability to speak freely and provide your opinions. And so I think if anyone's angry about his word, they don't have to agree with him, but to be angry about it, I think actually makes his point. I thought it was actually a pretty historic speech, whether you agree with him or not. I think the valid points he's making to Europe is we are concerned that the true values that we share, the values that bind us together with Europe, are things like free speech and democracy and our shared history in winning 2 world wars and defeating Soviet communism and the like. These are the values that we shared in common. And in that Cold War, we fought against things like censorship and oppression and so forth. And when you see backsliding and you raise that, that's a very valid concern. We can't tell them how to run their countries. He simply expressed in a speech his view of it, which a lot of people, frankly, share. And I thought he said a lot of things in that speech that needed to be said. And honestly, I don't know why anybody would be upset about it. People are allowed, you don't have to agree with someone's speech. I happen to agree with a lot of what he said, but you don't have to agree with someone's speech to at least appreciate the fact they have a right to say it, and that you should listen to it and see whether those criticisms are valid. I assure you, the United States has come under withering criticism on many occasions from many leaders in Europe, and we don't go around throwing temper tantrums about it.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history. I also think it's wrong. Again, I go back to the point of his speech. Okay, the point of his speech was basically that there is an erosion in free speech and intolerance for opposing points of view within Europe, and that's of concern because that is eroding.
I got to say, if you're going to mess around with Marco Rubio or Michael Waltz or Pete Hegseth, don't bring a pencil to a gunfight because they're too smart for this stuff. And they're not in a hurry. You know, he took his time. He wasn't in a hurry at all. And he knew it was a ridiculous assertion, so he carved it up. And don't make ridiculous assertions, and you won't look ridiculous. On Saturday night, I joined the hardest working man in the business, Brian Kilmeade. Does 5 days a week on Fox and Friends, does 5 days a week on his radio show. And then on Saturday, does One Nation. Here's my sit down with Brian from Saturday night.
The host of Hugh Hewitt Show. Hugh Hewitt joins us now. We've seen so much in your career. This has got to be one of the most unique pairings ever.
It is, Brian. I got to compliment you and your producers on that opening montage. When you go back and do it again, I just add Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis from Die Hard with a Vengeance. True. I don't like you because you're going to get me killed. But buddy movies, it's the perfect way to open this up. If we did history, though, we'd show Harry Hopkins being FDR's emissary to Churchill in 1940 to figure out whether or not Britain can survive. We would use Ben Bradley and John Kennedy. These are predicates for a president using an SGE. We call them special government employees now, but it's just somebody that they like and get along with. But the president remains the president. Donald Trump is in charge. Those Democrats melting down, they really have lost it. And that's another good montage. So if I hear that song one more time, my head's going to split open because that is the worst song I've ever heard sung. I think it's a great partnership. It's working very well, as Musk said in the Oval. They're going to make some mistakes. They're going fast. They're going to break some things. They're going to have to glue them back together. I'm all for it, Brian. All for it because what they found already, the USAID stuff, and they're just getting started. Wait till they get to the Department of Education. Wait till they get to transportation, aside from the FCC and, the FAA. When they get to the Department of Defense, I hope they go very carefully, but go very deep.
Absolutely. And do you worry that courts are going to stop it? I know they've already slowed it down. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with Ted Cruz. But do you worry they're going to stop it?
Well, I'm not worried. I think the Constitution is very strong. The nonsense about a constitutional crisis is just that nonsense by people who don't know anything about the law. Some district courts have impeded some actions. They will all be reviewed by appellate courts. They may get up to SCOTUS in a hurry. It depends on it. There's one overreach by a Trump appointee, by the way, where he told the president he could not recall USAID employees abroad. That just gets right into the heart of the president's foreign affairs commander-in-chief power, and I think that will be reversed in a hurry. If they've made mistakes about the dismissal of federal employees, I used to be the general counsel and deputy director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, long ago and far away. It's hard to fire a federal employee after the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act. But if they do it wrong, those employees will get reinstated or they'll get a buyout, whatever. It's not the end of the world. What's the end of the world is a $2 trillion deficit every year and $36 trillion in debt. We have to do this while also defending the country and making sure that the social safety net stays in place.
Yeah, right. And if we got the smartest guy doing it for free with his team that has 7 successful companies and made him the richest man in the world, please show me the downside. My opinion, the sleeping giant of this administration potentially could be RFK Jr. He has brought Democrats and Republicans together, especially moms, because we're going to look, it's what's in our food. Look what's in our vaccines, not banning vaccines. Do you agree with me on that, that when his nomination was actually confirmed this week, that he is going to be the beginning of something that could really produce something for every family?
I'm a little bit different, Brian. I will wait and see. I didn't come out against him because I don't know him, and I know that the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, is a huge part of the Trump coalition. Donald Trump is a very savvy operator when it comes to bringing together a group of people to work, as developers often do, on a multi-phase project with all sorts of different multi-uses in it, from golf courses to high-rises to residential and to commercial. So he's bringing together a team, and Robert Kennedy Jr. represents a lot to the MAHA movement. I hope he does not go too far, because he does have some rather eccentric views on some issues. So I'm going to wait and see. But HHS is very big. It's got lots of guardrails in it. There are lots of professionals that he's going to bring along with him. So I'm willing to see. I didn't oppose it because I think Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy represent part of the Trump coalition. And unlike Obama and unlike Biden, those two presidents went to the left when they were elected. Donald Trump's running to the center because he wants his coalition to endure. That's work of genius.
So this past week, Linda McMahon went up and had her day on trial to see if she's going to get that nomination. I'm sure she's certainly going to, but she made it clear, I would like to wind down the Department of Education. I would like to disperse it again. But yet it's counterintuitive in a way, because if you want control and want to upgrade it, why have less power inside of it?
It's the most ideologically driven bureaucracy, Brian. I had Bill Bennett on, former Secretary of Education, this week. Bill informed me there's a $1.7 trillion student loan portfolio listed as an asset on the books of the Department of Education. That ought to be privatized, sold off as an asset, allow the Republicans to do more tax cuts. As for their Office of Civil Rights, it's upside down completely. They're not protecting civil rights, they're protecting woke. There's a lot of ideological extremism at the Department of Education. Should be just block granted out to the states, get rid of it all, and I hope Linda McMahon is successful. They can move the OCR over to the DOJ's Division of Civil Rights and get the same thing done with better people.
So, you know, what's interesting as we look at the grades, we're going to be able to find out how President Trump is doing by looking at the numbers. They don't lie. In reading for fourth graders, they're down in reading, down in math. For eighth graders, too, down 8. For reading, down 8 in math. And in reading, down 5. So this is terrible, and we just spend more and more money if you look at how much money we're investing. So it's not a lack of focus, it's a lack of planning and maybe learning the wrong thing. What I'm also encouraged about is the elimination of CRT, the 1619 project. How convincing can they be in Washington to convince all 50 states that they got to start loving the country again with its curriculum?
Well, Congress can help. They could certainly attach to the budget reconciliation process a requirement that any state that receives federal money provide an education choice alternative. But I'm glad you brought up the nation's report card, Brian. I didn't know you were going to do that. That's a 5-alarm fire in parents' ears. If your kid can't read by the 4th grade, they're not going to learn. They're going to be functionally illiterate and unable to find satisfactory work that will do them well for the long term. We ought to absolutely treat it as such, and as Bennett said to me, we ought to stop everything else and focus exclusively on reading by score and rough age cohorts until individuals can read. Because the bottom 10%, in some cases the bottom quarter of 8th graders in many places, they're illiterate.
Hugh Hewitt, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much. It's going to be an interesting 4 years, judging by the first 3 weeks. I appreciate it. All right.
Always good to be on with Brian, and I'm glad he brought up, I was talking about it last week with a number of people, Mary Catherine Ham included, the nation's report card should give you a heart attack. And I quoted it last week. I'm going to quote it again. My oldest child, when she was going into 4th grade, had a wonderful 4th grade teacher. We had wonderful teachers. There's always a best teacher and there's always a worst teacher, but the worst wasn't that bad and the best was very great. And they were all public school teachers. So I'm not on jihad against the public schools. They've just fallen apart in California. But her 4th grade teacher in the first parent-teacher meeting said, grades 1 through 3, you learn to read, so that grades 4 on, you read to learn. And if you can't read by the end of the 4th grade, you're in a hole. First rule of hole is stop digging. So they ought to throw everything at reading. And I don't really mind if they take a group of kids out and they say, you're our special duper, super duper reading class. And we're going to do nothing but read all day. We're going to read to you. We're going to read with you. We're going to teach you phonics. We're going to teach you how to read. Because if you cannot read, you cannot learn. And if your child is struggling with books that they ought to be mastering, If they can't handle, take them to a library. Maybe you can't afford to have a lot of books around your house. Take them to a public library and find out what they can read. And if they can't read, go to the teacher and say they can't read. What are you going to do? The teacher says nothing, go to the principal and say, what are you going to do? They can't read, and they're never going to be able to read unless you teach them. I've asked an audience question. I don't watch the Sunday shows anymore. I did a cut sheet of them. So I hadn't listened to the Margaret Brennan interview in full of Marco Rubio yesterday until I got here to the studio and Dwayne had cut it up. And Jonathan Karl on ABC's This Week. I generally just don't because their audiences have shrunk to nothing. I used to do them all. I was under contract to NBC for a number of years and I had to do it. And I really do not understand who watches it anymore or whether they can be saved. So my question to the audience is, can they be saved and repurposed to any useful purpose other than legacy media talking to each other about their problems? 1-800-520-1234. Phil in La Alhambra. Hi, Phil.
Hello, friend Hugh. We got
Hey,
a little
Phil.
bit of asthma going on here.
Huh.
I don't think they get it, and I doubt they ever will.
What would you do to save them?
Nothing. Just let them go scream in the corner and get on with life. I'm teaching church history to a gazillion Christian Brazilians and enjoying life.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but I hope you're not watching the shows.
Absolutely not. That's what you're paid to do.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Thank you, Phil. I'm glad you must be doing a robo-listening thing. My phone number is 1-800-520-1234. Now, I'm not sweeping with a big broom here. I don't have anything worthwhile to play from you from the Sunday show. I can replay for you Margaret Brennan, and I'll start at the top. And I think this might be the same cut. Let's play the long one, cut number 10.
He lectured about what he described as censorship, mainly focusing, though, on including more views from the right. He also met with the leader of a far-right party known as the AfD, which, as you know, is under investigation and monitoring by German intelligence because of extremism. What did all of this accomplish other than irritating our allies?
Why would our allies or anybody be irritated by free speech and by someone giving their opinion? We are, after all, democracies. The Munich Security Conference is largely a conference of democracies in which one of the things that we cherish and value is the ability to speak freely and provide your opinions. And so I think if anyone's angry about his word, they don't have to agree with him, but to be angry about it, I think actually makes his point. I thought it was actually a pretty historic speech, whether you agree with him or not. I think the valid points he's making to Europe is we are concerned that the true values that we share, the values that bind us together with Europe, are things like free speech and democracy and our shared history in winning 2 world wars and defeating Soviet communism and the like. These are the values that we shared in common. And in that Cold War, we fought against things like censorship and oppression and so forth. And when you see backsliding and you raise that, that's a very valid concern. We can't tell them how to run their countries. He simply expressed in a speech his view of it, which a lot of people, frankly, share. And I thought he said a lot of things in that speech that needed to be said. And honestly, I don't know why anybody would be upset about it. People are allowed, you don't have to agree with someone's speech. I happen to agree with a lot of what he said, but you don't have to agree with someone's speech to at least appreciate the fact they have a right to say it, and that you should listen to it and see whether those criticisms are valid. I assure you, the United States has come under withering criticism on many occasions from many leaders in Europe, and we don't go around throwing temper tantrums about it.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship
I have to disagree with
was
you.
specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history. I also think it's wrong. Again, I go back to the point of his speech. Okay, the point of his speech was basically that there is an erosion in free speech and intolerance for opposing points of view within Europe, and that's of concern because that is eroding. It's not an erosion of your military capabilities. That's not an erosion of your economic standing. That's an erosion of the actual values that bind us together in this transatlantic union that everybody talks about. And I think allies and friends and partners that have worked together now for 80 years should be able to speak frankly to one another in open forums. Without being offended, insulted, or upset. And I spoke to foreign ministers from multiple countries throughout Europe. Many of them probably didn't like the speech or didn't agree with it, but they were continuing to engage with us on all sorts of issues that unite us. So again, at the end of the day, I think that people give all. That is a forum in which you're supposed to be inviting people to give speeches, not basically a chorus where everyone is saying the exact same thing. That's not always going to be the case when it's a collection of democracies where leaders have the right and the privilege to speak their minds in forums such as these.
Now, the worst part about that exchange is when Margaret Brennan says, "You know that." It is a poker tell that someone does not want to discuss something, or I can't believe you don't agree with this, or we all understand. There are poker tells when you assert that you have made an unfalsifiable claim. You know this. And of course, he doesn't know that. And of course, the gentleman would have said, I'm a little bit confused, Margaret. Would you explain to me the connection between the rise of the Nazis and free speech? I don't know. She's not talking about the Reichstag fire. She's not talking about Kristallnacht. I really don't know what she had in her mind or what she intended to say. Mike in Glendora, 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Hugh. Hey, listen, I don't think the Sunday shows can be saved unless you go to a format like a Hannity and Combs, where you have a strong conservative and a strong liberal like they all are. I don't think somebody like an Anna Navarro, who's a rhino, would be welcome on something like that. But you got to have that. If you have the two dissenting views, and you can still have your panelists, but it just doesn't seem possible to have just one point of view being portrayed, and that's my thought on it.
Well, okay, thank you. The history of this is Meet the Press was originally a moderator and three members of the press talking to a single guest. That was a half hour, 80 years ago. So the equivalent of Chet Huntley would sit down and have three other journalists, and they would talk to a guest, and you would meet the press, and then you would face the nation. ABC is the youngest of the three. With This Week, and the whole system changed when television went into creating personalities and building market share around personalities, and that's broken. So I don't know that it can be saved. I don't know that anyone's ever going to go back and watch it anymore. And I don't know that trying to be Bill Maher is going to work on a Sunday morning. It doesn't even work on a Friday night or a Saturday night. I don't know if any of you watched the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live. I didn't, because I'm not interested in that either. There's a lot of controversy about it. I don't really care. 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show. I've asked the audience, 1-800-520-1234, because a lot of Mondays over the 25 years of this program I've spent going over the Sunday shows, I'm getting close to saying to Dwayne, don't bother. There's nothing there. And I wonder if they can be saved. We have on the line Severe Cruz Conservative. He is a tribble. That means he's been a subscriber to the Universe for a very long time and is often drunk. But I don't know if he is today. Are you sober up today, Severe Cruz Conservative?
Totally. Greetings, Hugh. We are also called Dwayniacs.
Well, the Dwayniacs I understand, but the Dwayniacs are the ones who are really in the Seuss.
Could be. I personally don't drink.
Okay.
On the Sunday shows, I don't care if they can be saved, but what Margaret and her team were trying to do, and she was too stupid to execute it. They were trying to say the problem was the democracy in Weimar Germany allowed the Nazis to come to power. So they're analogizing that to AfD in the current Germany. They're analogizing it to Trump. That is the subtext. She just couldn't execute the policy.
That's a better defense than I came up with.
Well, I'm not defending her.
No, but I mean, that actually makes more sense. I couldn't come up with, there's no making sense of what she said, right?
Clearly, and as Ben Dominic tweeted today, here's what you need to understand. Margaret is a very stupid person.
But I used to have her as a guest, and she didn't strike me as that. But to the larger point, should I just say to Dwayne, you don't need to cut up the Sunday shows anymore, unless it's like Tom Homan talking over on Fox. Do I need to do it anymore? Does anyone care?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wish you would ask Tom Cotton about Elbridge Colby, however.
Unfortunately, I've taped my entire interview with Senator Cotton already, so I can't be doing
Good work. But there's always next week, Hugh.
All right.
Be listening.
All right. Thank you, my friend. I hope he votes for Elbridge Colby. No reason for me to believe he won't. Josh in Missouri, 1-800-520-1234. What do you think, Josh?
Good afternoon, Hugh.
Good afternoon to you.
Listener, second-time caller.
Oh, good.
I'm a truck driver out here hauling propane, getting ready for a big storm.
Where are you in the Show Me State?
Right now, I'm driving through Springfield.
Am I on the air? Are you listening online?
I'm listening online.
Okay.
But usually, I can get you out of Arkansas.
Yeah, I didn't know where I was in Springfield, so I'm glad that you're listening online. So, do I give up on cutting the tape?
Well, as far as the Sunday shows, I haven't listened for years, really. I think, like you've said, that the mainstream media is bleeding out, and it's just impossible to watch these shows because they really don't want to hear what people that have a differing opinion, they don't want to hear what we have to say. They just have their script that they go by, and there's just, that's it, and there's nothing else.
Do you think what she was trying to say is what severe Cruz conservatives said she was trying to say, which is the Weimar Republic allowed Hitler to come to power. They had the First Amendment, and now it's happening again in Germany. I mean, that's such a reach. That's really bad. But
what's happening in Germany is, the same thing that was, starting to happen here. And really, I was born in 1964, so I've watched quite a few administrations come and go. And honestly, I think it really started to really fester when Obama got into office. I don't have anything against the man personally. I didn't vote for him, but I don't, really go along with the left-wing narrative.
Yeah, I really don't have anything against. I know most of these people in the media. I've been on their sets. I've interviewed them on the program. I've got nothing against them. I don't think they know how to build an audience, and so they are defaulting to the MSNBC model of super serving the hyper left partisans, and there aren't enough of them to make a show.
Well, it's a lot like nighttime television too. I mean, there's nothing on any of the night shows like
I haven't watched
Johnny Carson and
Gutfeld owns them. There is, however, Landman. When I come back, I'm going to have to tell people about Landman. I'm the last person in America to catch up with it, but I'll try and give you the PG-13 version of Landman. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back. Thank you so much, Josh. Drive safely as you go through the Show Me State. Always love the people who are listening on the big where he's going through places where I don't think I have an affiliate, and they're very loyal. Radio's changed so much. Broadcast has changed so much. Of course, I got a YouTube channel as well. If you missed any of the interviews today with Senator Cotton, by all means, go and catch them. But I wanted to give you a quick update on Landman. Now, I didn't think I was going to watch this because I thought it was going to be, and it is in fact NC-17. And it's violent and the language is bad, and I thought, Fetchy Mrs. Hewitt doesn't want to watch this. But one very good couple friend of ours said, no, you will find this really entertaining and compelling television. And it is entertaining, compelling television because Billy Bob Thornton is a very fine actor, and he is the lead role. Now, it's the same role he played in Goliath, and here's the difference. In Goliath, I'm a California lawyer. I'm still licensed. I don't practice anymore. I teach, but I practiced for 27 years in California. I maintained my bar license in California and in the District of Columbia, and I know my way around the law. So when I watch Goliath and extraordinarily incredible things would happen that don't make sense in the real world of the law, I could throw a flag and penalize the show's writers for 15 yards for making stuff up that they have no idea what they're talking about. And that kind of happened in Landman, Hour 4, because there's a deposition scene that the stuff doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And there's the legal side of this stuff does not happen. But I don't know anything about the oil business. Zero, less than zero. I can pump it. That's the extent of it. Now, I used to be on the Air Quality Management District. I know about emissions. But I do not know, and I know where they want to build pipelines, because I had a client that wanted to build pipelines through a bunch of gnatcatchers in Montebello once, and that took about 5 years. And that was fine. Their checks cleared. They were good clients. And I think we got the pipeline built eventually. Can't remember. And I know that you got to have pipelines and you got to frack and you got to have, if you run in Huntington Beach, there are those grasshoppers that go round and round, I don't know, from the beginning of time. I don't know when they went in. So Landman is about the patch. And the closest I've ever been to the patch is watching Friday Night Lights. And that's probably not very realistic either. Bottom line, I don't know if any of it's true. I would love for someone in Texas to give me an authenticity scale. Like Goliath is at 30%. All right, that's 30% of it might happen for a down-and-out lawyer on out of their luck. Like The Verdict was horrible with Paul Newman, 1,000. I don't like lawyer movies because they always try and make what is essentially dull and expensive, interesting, and cheap with winners. And bad settlement's better than a good lawsuit, and permitting is not very exciting to begin with. So all the stuff going on in the oil patch, I don't think the cartels work that way either. So I don't know. But I would love someone to call and tell me, 1-800-520-1234, what percentage of Landman is true. Meanwhile, John in Michigan. Hi, John, you're on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, Hugh, how are you? Yes, I love your show.
Thank you.
A friend of mine, I live in a suburb. A friend of mine, calls Meet the Press, Meet the Depressed.
It can be that way.
It can be. And, personally, I'm a person of a certain age. I'm 67. And, we had Chuck Todd. We had David Gregory. We've got Kristen Welker now. I don't think it's ever been the same since Tim Russert. I would love to see more data on the declining ratings of these shows. What is This Week with David Brinkley, compared to This Week with George Stephanopoulos?
Oh, it's a slaughterhouse. I know the ratings. I followed them when I used to do it, when I worked for NBC. And they have a little competition among the Sunday shows, which doesn't really matter because they're shadows of their former audience because the audience have splintered. Yeah. Now, there are 123 million Americans or 133 million Americans willing to turn on a television to watch the Super Bowl. So that's your maximum audience, 133 million. Yeah. I don't think any of them have 2 million a week. I don't think so.
Either.
And I'll bet you Shannon has the most now. I haven't checked in a while. And I just don't think Americans watch television on Sunday morning anymore. I think they've got better things to do with their time. And it's not informative. It's not news.
No. it's it's all basically a broadcast version of that Sunday's New York Times. Whatever talking points, Maureen Dowd thought it was clever to write about. Oh, let's come up with this angle. It's just warmed up. It's warmed up leftovers.
Well, if I were a producer, not king, not queen, not duke, not earl, I would have taken the vice president's speech. I would have had the host cut the vice president's speech up. Last segment of the day, I'm going to play what I did in the first segment of the day, Donald Trump at Daytona, so that people who are separated by 3 hours get to hear it at one point. But I would have taken the vice president's speech and I would have played 2 or 3 minutes and gone to 3 relatively diverse viewpoints for a reaction. And then I would have played some more and done it again. I would have done some more and done it again. And not be adversarial, I would have informed the audience about. I played the vice president's speech because it was a magnificent speech on the day that he gave it. So it's been 3 days, and they're not. The other thing that's crazy about this, they're assuming facts, not in evidence. Most of their audience has no idea what the vice president said in Germany, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're gonna reference something without playing, it's only a 22-minute speech. They could have played a lot of it, and they probably would have done better by their audience had they done it the Hugh way, but they didn't. Thank you, John. When I come back, I want to play for you a little bit more, but first, Tom Homan. Tom Homan's my new favorite guy. Tom Homan was on with Stuart Varney and said this, cut number 7.
I mean, look, President Trump's been clear. We're going to put the worst of the worst at Gitmo. And look, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. No one's off the table. If you're in this country illegally, it's not okay. But President Trump has said from day one, we're going to concentrate on public safety threats and national security threats. Varney, I looked at the numbers today. In the last 24 hours, a total of 229 people were encountered by the Border Patrol on the southwest border. 229. I haven't seen that. I've been doing this job since 1984 as a Border Patrol agent. I've never seen the numbers that low. 229 compared to
229 people. I think the messaging worked. I think the messaging, we're not going to let you in, has worked. Dwayne has asked me to update you on Elon Musk's post from, I guess 5 hours ago. I saw it, and I don't know if it's true, but I'll tell you about it. According to the United States Census, there are 100,000 Americans who are 100 years or older. I would have thought there were more out of 330 million. Are you sure about that, Dwayne? Only 100,000?
That sounds about right.
No, 330 million.
No,
10% would be 33 million. 1% would be 3.3 million.
COVID wiped a lot of that elderly generation
out.
out.
So anyway, whatever it is, Elon is not screwing around with your checks. You're going to get them if you're on Social Security. But he points out that Social Security says there are 4,700,000 people between the ages of 100 and 109. He says that Social Security says there are 3,600,000 between the ages of 110 and 119, 3,400,000 between the ages of 120 and 129, 3,900,000 between the ages of 130 and 139, 3,500,000 between the ages of 140 and 149, 1 million people, 1.3 million people between the ages of 150 and 159, and only 121,000 people over 160, but younger than 169. But there are 6,000 hardy souls who are 170 years old. So obviously, if Elon's data is right, there's problem in the system. All right, there's problem in the system. But Donald Trump is here. Donald Trump was on the Daytona tarmac and said this, cut number 1.
Remember, I've been here for 3 weeks. And when you saw the inflation numbers, I've been here for 3 weeks. I have had nothing to do with inflation. This was caused by Biden. I had 4 years of virtually no inflation. So I'm just taking over. But I'll tell you what, this country has made more progress in the last 3 weeks than it's made in the last 4 years. And we're respected again as a country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cut number 3 as well.
Remember this, that under Bush, they took a lot. Under Obama, they took a lot. Under Biden, they're trying to take the whole thing. And under Trump, they took nothing.
Okay, and then let's just play cut number 4. This is Donald Trump walking around the tarmac at Daytona. Now, you couldn't get me to go to Daytona. Not my crowd. But the folks who are I'm not into cars going fast and loud. I went to the California Speedway once with Generalissimo, and we had a great remote broadcast from there, and it was a lot of fun one day. But it's not my idea of a good time. But boy, do they love Donald Trump at the Daytona 500. And I would suggest, if I were the Democrats, I might go to ground for a while. I really might go to ground for 6 months, like the Republicans did after Obama blew us out in 2008. You didn't hear much from us in 2009. Tea Party developed organically. I just don't think I would fight uphill for the rest of the half year. Maybe July 4th, come back out. But until then, I'll be here every day on the Hugh Hewitt Show.